The phone was still warm in his hand when he heard it, his name, spoken low but sharp through the crackling silence of the other end. He hadn't meant to listen. He called Rachel to ask if she needed anything from the store, milk, maybe, or her favorite cereal, and the call must have connected before the line fully rang. Her voice drifted in, unmistakable, sharp with frustration, the kind she usually reserved for group texts or when slamming her bedroom door. "I swear, he ruined my life," she said. The words landed hard, like bricks on wet concrete. He froze. Rachel laughed bitterly, not knowing he was there. "Everything I've ever missed out on, vacations, dance programs, college tours, was because of him. My friends don't get it. Their dads gave them something. All he ever gave me was struggle." There was a pause, then the faint sound of her friend murmuring something in response. Rachel's answer came quick, raw. "I don't even think he knows how small he made my life. He just walks around that house like it's some big achievement. A used-up man with a 2-bedroom mortgage and no idea how much he's held me back." He didn't know whether to hang up or keep listening. Something in him, stubborn, wounded, held still. He heard her voice shift. "He acts like I owe him for putting a roof over my head. That place? It's a cage. I swear, once I get out, I'm never going back." The call cut out, battery dead, maybe. Or maybe she noticed. Either way, the silence afterward felt heavier than anything she'd said. He sat at the kitchen table for a long time, the old wood chair creaking beneath him. In front of him sat the grocery list he'd written earlier, still blank except for her name in the corner. He stared at it like it might rewrite what he'd just heard. He thought about the years. About the double shifts at the factory, the sack lunches, the nights he came home too tired to speak but still managed to help her finish her book reports. The birthdays with dollar store decorations, the Christmas mornings where he wrapped thrift shop finds in recycled paper and smiled like they were from Bloomingdale's. And now? He'd ruined her life. He didn't cry. That wasn't something he allowed himself anymore. But something in him cracked, something that had held steady through job losses, hospital bills, and grief. For the first time in years, he didn't feel tired. He felt awake. Cold, but clear. Like a man stepping outside into winter air after sitting too long in a house gone stale. The words echoed again, but this time, they landed differently. He ruined her life. No, he thought. But maybe, just maybe, it was time she learned whose life built hers. He used to believe love was measured in effort, not applause. You didn't sign your name at the bottom of a bill or a permission slip expecting gratitude, you just did it, because that's what being a father meant. You made sure there was food, that shoes still fit in the fall, that birthdays came with candles, even if the gifts were modest and the cake was from a box. Now, sitting alone on the edge of his bed, the silence of the house pressed against him like a second skin. The walls knew. They'd seen it all. He remembered the years stacked like bricks, the graveyard shifts unloading pallets in the freezing warehouse, the taxi hours he picked up on weekends to cover Rachel's field trips. He'd pulled 16-hour days with swollen feet and a lower back that screamed when he sat too long. His friends used to ask why he didn't just cut back. "She's just a kid," they'd say. "She won't remember any of it." But he remembered. He remembered the time she begged to go to that science camp in Oregon. He hadn't had the money, not then, but he found a way. Sold his old guitar, his last indulgence, just so she could take photos under redwood trees, with a smile so wide it made his ribs ache. He remembered the prom dress, the one she circled in a catalog. It cost more than his paycheck that week, so he skipped meals and pretended he was watching his weight. She never noticed. He hoped she wouldn't. He remembered the Christmas he spent in the cab instead of home, ferrying strangers through snow, because the heating bill had ballooned with a cold snap, and the thought of her shivering in her bedroom kept him from sleeping. And now she said he ruined her life. He rubbed his hands together slowly. They were rough now, always dry no matter how much lotion he used. Hands that had once held her tiny ones to help her walk. Hands that had assembled bikes in the dead of night, packed school lunches, filled out FAFSA forms. She had no idea what those hands had done for her. Maybe that was the point. All those years, he thought he was building something. A safety net. A foundation. But maybe he'd built a pedestal instead, one she now used to look down on him. He stood slowly, knees aching, and walked to the kitchen. The calendar on the wall still showed last month. Appointments missed, plans forgotten. Somewhere between her ballet recitals and overdue rent, he'd forgotten himself. Regret sat in his chest like a stone. Not because he did it. He would do it all over again. The pain didn't come from the sacrifice. It came from the silence after. From the fact that she never saw any of it. Or worse, saw it and dismissed it. He closed the fridge door without taking anything out. He wasn't hungry anymore. It was supposed to be a bridge, not a destination. He could still picture that day, clear as spring sunlight on tile. She had shown up on his doorstep with red-rimmed eyes and trembling hands, her life packed into the back of a borrowed SUV. The ink on the divorce papers was still wet. Rachel had always been proud, but that afternoon, she was all jagged edges and soft apologies. "Just for a while, Dad. Until I get back on my feet." Of course. Always. Without hesitation, he handed her the keys. Not to a guest room or the basement, but to the whole house. She needed space, she needed healing, and he couldn't bear the thought of her navigating life alone with everything unraveling around her. She was still his little girl, even if her makeup was perfect and her bitterness practiced. For a few weeks, it was fine. Quiet dinners. Muted laughter. The strange comfort of shared silence over cups of coffee. He would knock before entering her space. She would thank him for restocking the fridge. It was uneven, but at least it was something. But weeks turned into months. Her belongings began to seep into the corners of the house like creeping ivy. First, the framed art over the fireplace. Then the new couch, his old recliner. Just didn't fit the aesthetic. The bookshelf in the hallway, stocked with titles he'd never read and mugs she brought back from yoga retreats. She rearranged the pantry without asking. Changed the Wi-Fi password. Repainted the bathroom. Once, he came home from a doctor's appointment and found a "Live, laugh, love" decal above the kitchen sink. He stared at it for 10 full minutes. It wasn't just the words, it was that she'd never asked. Eventually, her tone changed too. Less. "Thanks, Dad." More. "You forgot to pick up oat milk." Less. "Your house." More. "This place." He heard her on the phone once, telling someone, "Yeah, I've settled back in. It's nothing fancy, but it's home." Home. She spoke of it like he no longer existed inside it. Like his name was scratched off the deed of memory. He tried to tell himself she was just adjusting. That it was hard for her too. But then came the argument about the thermostat. The guests she invited over without telling him. The time she told him not to rearrange the garage because she'd organized it properly. He started keeping a toothbrush in the downstairs bathroom. She called it a shared space. Now, though he still paid the taxes, still mowed the lawn, still replaced the water heater when it failed. Somewhere along the way, the house stopped being a refuge. It became a performance. Her curated recovery, staged inside the walls he painted with his own 2 hands. And she never gave the keys back. He used to love the sound the front door made when it opened, hinges creaking just slightly, a breath of fresh air, then the familiar thud of wood settling into the frame. Now, it filled him with dread. Because it usually meant Rachel was home, and that meant silence, or worse, sarcasm dressed up as civility. He wasn't sure when it shifted, exactly. Maybe it was the day he offered to make her breakfast, and she laughed like it was a joke. "You don't need to hover, Dad. I'm a grown woman, not a kindergartner." After that, he stopped offering. He made his coffee quietly in the mornings now, careful not to clink the spoon against the mug. He avoided the creaky floorboard near the pantry, the one she once called a jump scare at 7 a.m. The kitchen became hers. The living room, too. He retreated to the corners. His old office turned into a reading room he rarely entered, the backyard bench that wobbled, but at least faced the sun. Sometimes, when she had friends over, he'd overhear the laughter and the low hum of conversation behind closed doors. His name never came up. Once, passing through the hallway, he caught part of it. "He's harmless, just stuck in his ways. Like a houseplant that sighs." She'd said it with a smile, and the guests had chuckled. He didn't sleep much that night. He'd been called many things in his life, provider, worker, father, but houseplant had a special sting. And maybe it wouldn't have landed so hard if it didn't feel so true. His routines had shrunk to the edges of the day. Rise early, read the paper alone, fix something small that didn't really need fixing. Try not to be in the way. She accused him of being needy once, when he asked if she wanted to have dinner together. He hadn't made a second offer. The bathroom schedule was hers now. He waited until she left in the mornings before shaving, brushing his teeth, showering. It was easier that way. Less noise. Less eye contact. He used to hum while he cooked, a quiet, off-key melody that comforted him more than it entertained. Rachel once called it a soundtrack to loneliness. He stopped humming. The house echoed differently now. The same walls, same furniture, but everything felt foreign. Cold. Like someone had taken all the warmth out and replaced it with Pinterest inspiration boards and invisible rules. He didn't know how it had come to this. How he had gone from the man who handed over the keys to the man tiptoeing through his own hallway, hoping not to disturb a daughter who had mistaken presence for burden. He wasn't a father anymore. He was an inconvenience. A ghost in his own kitchen. It started with an envelope on the dining room table, thick paper, a glossy return address from a bank he didn't recognize. He wasn't snooping. It had his last name on it, and he'd assumed it was meant for him. But when he opened it, the words told a different story. Primary residence, 412 Heatherbrook Drive. That was his address. His home. The one he'd built with callous hands and sleepless nights, one pay stub at a time. The house where Rachel learned to walk, where Maria used to sing while folding laundry, where the walls still whispered memories in the quiet. That house. Underneath her name, in bold, was the word borrower. He read it twice before setting it down, heart stumbling in his chest like a man who'd missed the last step in the dark. She was applying for a mortgage, using his home as her residence. Without asking, without even mentioning it. Later that evening, she came in wearing a new blazer and smelling like perfume he didn't recognize. Big day, she said, tossing her keys onto the kitchen counter. I think I crushed it. He nodded, waiting to see if she'd offer anything more. She didn't. Bank stuff? He asked, casually enough. Rachel blinked, then shrugged. Just paperwork. Nothing you need to worry about. The words dropped like lead into the space between them. Nothing you need to worry about. Later that night, when she thought he was asleep, he heard her on the phone in the guest room. The door wasn't all the way closed, and her voice carried just enough. I mean, he's not gonna be around forever. It'll all come to me eventually, right? She laughed after she said it, light, unbothered, the kind of laugh someone makes when they're confident they're right. He sat there in the dark, staring at the ceiling that had dripped after last winter's storm. He'd fixed it himself, standing on that old ladder with aching knees. Just like he'd fixed everything else around here. Not for her inheritance, but for her comfort. And now it was just expected. Assumed. As if he were a placeholder on a title deed, just biding his time until the house could finally be hers. He didn't sleep that night. Not because of anger. Not entirely. It was the grief. The quiet, suffocating kind that comes when you realize someone you love sees you not as a person, but as a stepping stone. A windfall. A means to an end. And for the first time, he wondered what would happen if he stopped holding everything together for someone who had already moved on in her mind. Without him. It was buried between pages stiff with time and flour dust. He wasn't even looking for it, just reaching for Maria's old tamale recipe in the back of the cupboard, the one she always wrote by hand because she'd insisted. A recipe typed is a recipe forgotten. He hadn't opened the book in years. The cover was cracked, the spine tired from decades of Sundays and Christmases and Tuesday night dinners that had somehow become sacred. And there, folded neatly between the dessert section and her grandmother's mole sauce, was her handwriting. On a plain sheet of paper, yellowed at the edges. No date. Just her voice, still steady in ink. Luis, if you're reading this, I'm probably gone. But listen to me. Don't ever let anyone make you small in your own home. Not Rachel. Not grief. Not guilt. You've given enough. When it's time to choose between peace and pleasing others, choose peace. Always. Love, M. His hand shook as he held the page. He could almost hear her, the way she'd read aloud when Rachel was a baby, her voice warm and full of certainty. There was no room for doubt in Maria's tone, never had been. When she believed in something, she stitched it into the fabric of their lives, quietly, stubbornly, and forever. He sat down at the kitchen table, the one Rachel had turned into her work desk these past few months. Her laptop still sat open beside a mug half full of almond milk. It used to be his spot, where he paid the bills, read the morning paper, taught Rachel how to write her name. Now he didn't even feel welcome sitting there without asking. He looked back at the letter, ran his thumb across her name. Not even a full page. Just enough to remind him of who he'd once been. Of who they'd been together, two people who made do, gave everything they had, and never needed more than each other and this home. But now this place was crowded with unspoken tension, bruised egos, and entitlement thick enough to choke on. Maria wouldn't have stood for it. She'd have cleared her throat, wiped her hands on a dish towel, and told Rachel, kindly but firmly, that this house was not hers to take, and her father was not some invisible fixture to manage around. He folded the letter carefully, pressed it to his chest for a moment, and then slid it into his wallet. It was time to remember who he was. Not a ghost. Not a burden. Not a placeholder on a deed. Luis Alvarez was a man who had built a life, brick by brick, sacrifice by sacrifice. And he would not be made small. Not in his own home. Not ever again. The house smelled like rosemary and charred lemon. Soft jazz played from a Bluetooth speaker in the corner, and the dining room table was dressed like something out of a lifestyle magazine. Linen napkins, glassware that caught the candlelight just right, all of it hers. Her taste. Her night. Luis had stayed in his room most of the day, letting Rachel take over the kitchen with her friends. He wasn't invited, not formally. She told him, offhandedly, "It's just a little thing for work, some of the team and their spouses. You don't need to worry about it." So he hadn't. Not out loud. He waited until the food had been served and the clinking of cutlery turned to laughter. Then he stepped out, quietly, to get a glass of water. He wasn't looking to interrupt, just pass through. A shadow at the edge of his own hallway. That's when he heard her. They were seated around the table, full glasses in hand, relaxed and glowing with the kind of confidence that came from wine and shared ambition. Rachel was mid-story. Something about a meeting that went sideways, and how she had to step in and fix everything. She always loved being the one who saved the day. And then, casually, like it was a line she'd practiced before, "My dad's just always been in the way. I mean, I love him, but let's be honest, he's like this constant presence I have to manage around." The table chuckled. Not cruel, just complicit. Someone asked, "Does he still live with you?" Rachel laughed. "Other way around, technically. But it won't be forever." Luis stood there in the hallway, half in shadow, the refrigerator light spilling faintly from the kitchen behind him. He didn't move. Didn't flinch. He just stood still as her words settled around him, not like a blow, but like dust finally exposing what had always been there. He wasn't sad. Not anymore. What cracked open inside him wasn't heartbreak. It was clarity. For years, he'd made himself small. To keep peace. To offer comfort. To give her space to rebuild her life inside the walls he paid for, painted, maintained. And now, he was something to be managed. He turned away before anyone saw him, stepped back into the kitchen, filled his glass slowly. The hum of the fridge masked the sound of his breath. Back in his room, he closed the door gently. Sat down at his desk. Opened the drawer. Pulled out the folder with the deed. Tomorrow, he'd make a call. Not in anger. Not to punish. But because enough was enough. The folder had sat at the back of the filing cabinet for years, untouched except for tax season or the occasional insurance audit. Faded manila, labeled in Maria's handwriting, house docs. The letters were faint now, like everything from that era, gentle, thinning, but still holding shape. Luis placed it carefully on the kitchen table, where Rachel's wine glasses still sat from the night before. One had a faint lipstick print on the rim. He ignored it. He flipped the folder open and sorted through the paper slowly, deliberately. He wanted to feel every inch of it. The life he had built. The fine print that carried weight even when his presence no longer did. The deed was near the back. Cream-colored, slightly curled at the edges. He read it once. Then again. Luis Alvarez. Sole owner. No co-signer. No lien. No mention of Rachel. No addendum. No amendment. He reached for the amortization statement next. Final payment date circled in red pen, March 2021. That was the day he paid the house off in full. No confetti. No champagne. Just a quiet moment in the bank lobby and a walk back to the car with tears he refused to name. He leaned back in the chair and let the truth settle in his bones. This house was his. Legally. Financially. Historically. Every beam and nail and tile had his name buried somewhere beneath it, painted over, perhaps, but not erased. He remembered patching drywall with Maria after Rachel slammed the door during her teenage years. He remembered fixing that same door 3 years ago, alone, while Rachel texted on the couch and asked if the noise would take long. He stared down at the deed, this dry document that suddenly felt like a rope tossed to a drowning man. He hadn't been powerless. He had just forgotten what was his. Rachel had moved in, rearranged furniture, redefined spaces, and rewritten the story. But she had never signed a paper. Never paid a dime toward the principal. Never offered to. She had taken the gift and called it her own. He closed the folder, slower this time, as if sealing something sacred. For the first time in months, maybe years, he stood up straighter. The house didn't belong to her future. It belonged to his past, his sweat, his years. And he had every right to decide what came next. He placed the folder back in the drawer, not to hide it, but to remind himself. Nothing had been taken from him. He had simply stopped claiming it. That was about to change. The office was quiet, tucked above a florist's shop and painted in muted grays that made everything feel still. Louise sat in a worn leather chair across from a man named Carter, mid-40s, clean desk, tie loose at the neck. The kind of lawyer who didn't speak in flourishes, just facts. Carter read through the deed with practiced eyes, flipping pages while Louise waited, hands folded on his lap. The air smelled faintly of eucalyptus and printer ink. After a minute, Carter looked up. So you're the sole owner. No liens, no joint tenancy, no transfer on death clauses. You've got clear title. Louise nodded once, unsure if that was good or just expected. Carter leaned back, fingers steepled. You can sell this property anytime you want, Mr. Alvarez. You don't need consent from anyone, not your daughter, not anyone living there. She's not on anything? Not even. Louise gestured vaguely. Residency stuff? Legally? No. She's a guest. You've got full authority. If you want to list it tomorrow, you can. Louise blinked. It wasn't the information that stunned him. It was the certainty. I thought maybe... He trailed off, then sighed. I let her take over. I stopped saying no. It felt like maybe I'd already given it away. Carter didn't soften. He wasn't that kind of man. But his voice lost some of its edge. People forget, ownership isn't just legal. It's mental. Emotional. When someone's loud enough for long enough, it's easy to think you're standing on their ground, even when the deed says otherwise. Louise nodded slowly, the words sitting with him. Not heavy. Just true. He hesitated, then asked the question that had been rattling around his chest since that night in the hallway. How fast could it move? If I did sell. Carter opened a drawer, pulled out a slim folder. Market's hot. All cash buyers are common. If you're serious, I can connect you to a trusted agent today. 2, maybe 3 weeks to close. Faster if you're ready. Louise swallowed. 3 weeks. 3 weeks, and the house could be someone else's. Not Rachel's. His. Until he chose otherwise. He stood slowly, shook Carter's hand with both of his own. I'll need a little time. But not much. No problem, Carter said. When you're ready, we move. Outside, the air felt sharper. More real. Traffic hummed in the distance, and a breeze pushed leaves across the sidewalk in a slow shuffle. Louise didn't rush to his car. He walked for a while, past shop windows and strangers and quiet intersections. He wasn't lost. He was just remembering that he could leave, anytime he wanted, and no one could tell him otherwise. The realtor arrived 5 minutes early, clipboard in hand, wearing polished shoes that looked too clean for the neighborhood. He introduced himself as Mark, smiled wide, and called Louise, sir, in that quick, practiced way that meant he didn't mean anything by it. Luis let him in, stepping aside as Mark took in the house with trained eyes, sweeping glances, quiet nods, notes scribbled on a tablet. He moved from room to room, like he was already showing it to someone else. "Hardwood's real?" Mark asked. "Installed it myself," Luis said. "Nice touch. Big plus." They moved through the kitchen. Mark tapped the countertop and checked the view from the back window. "That tree's going to be a selling point. Buyers love a mature yard." Luis said nothing. He watched the man take notes, his pen moving quickly, confidently. "You'd be surprised how fast things go right now," Mark said. "This zip code's hot, school district's decent, close to commuter lines, no HOA. If we list it right, I can have offers before the weekend." Luis raised an eyebrow. "That fast?" "Cash buyers, sir. A lot of people don't want to deal with financing delays, especially if the home's clean, well-maintained, and priced to move." He paused at the doorway to the living room, where a framed photo of Rachel as a toddler still sat on the mantel. He didn't ask about her, just turned back toward Luis. "If you're motivated," he said gently, "this is a seller's dream." Motivated? That word lingered. Luis looked around the space that once held his entire life, where Rachel took her first steps, where Maria danced barefoot while cooking, where birthday candles had been blown out year after year by hands now absent. It wasn't just drywall and paint. It was memory. It was everything. But it was also something else now. It was tired. It was filled with tension, with a daughter who made him feel like a guest in his own story. Luis crossed his arms. "What about furniture? We can stage or sell as is. You keeping anything?" "Some," he said. "Not much." Mark made another note. "That makes things easier." Luis walked him to the front door. They shook hands again, firmer this time. "I'll send over the documents," Mark said. "Take your time. But if you want to move, we move fast." Luis nodded. The door shut quietly behind him. He stood in the hallway for a long moment, staring at the empty air Mark had just walked through. There were still dishes in the sink. Still Rachel's jacket draped over the couch. Still a shadow of a family that had slowly faded. But now, finally, there was also a timeline. And it was starting to feel real. He didn't announce anything. No family meeting. No dramatic declaration. Just slow, quiet motion, like shifting furniture in the dark. Intentional, measured, unseen. He started with a desk drawer. Birth certificates, insurance policies, letters Maria had written him from the hospital when she thought she'd be home by Christmas. He sorted them into folders, careful not to crease the corners, not to smudge her ink with his fingers. Then came the closet. He kept the good winter coat, the one Maria liked, and gave the rest to Goodwill. A young man at the donation center asked if he was downsizing. Luis just smiled. "Something like that." He packed in the evenings, when Rachel was out or buried in her laptop with her headphones on. He boxed up photos and tools, kept the smallest hammer but left the sockets set. He wasn't planning on building much anymore. Every few days, he'd call a number on a yellow post-it he kept in his wallet. A woman named Nora answered, property manager at a coastal senior condo community with furnished units, walking trails, and balconies that faced the ocean. It wasn't luxury, but it was clean, quiet, and his. "I've transferred the full payment," he said one afternoon. "I'll take possession the first Monday of next month." There was a pause, then Nora's warm, practiced reply. "We'll have it ready for you. Welcome home, Mr. Alvarez." Welcome home. He'd hung up without saying much more. Now, each day, the house grew a little barer. The junk drawer was empty. The garage shelves thinned. He took down the clock Rachel had bought last year, the one that ticked too loudly at night, and replaced it with Maria's old one from the hallway. He liked how it ticked soft and low, like a breath. On his last trip to the attic, he found a box labeled Rachel, age 7. Inside were crayon drawings, spelling tests, a birthday card he'd forgotten he kept. "You are the best dad in the universe," it read, in looping pencil. He held it for a long time. Not out of longing, but to remember it existed. Then he placed it in the box he'd marked. "Take with me." Luis didn't rush. This wasn't escape. It was extraction. The careful, methodical act of reclaiming his space, his rhythm, his name. The realtor sent papers. Louis signed them. No drama. No hesitation. By the time Rachel noticed the missing items, she just assumed he was cleaning. She didn't ask. Maybe she didn't want to know. And maybe, for the first time in a long while, he didn't need her to. It started over something small. It always did. Louise had left the bathroom window open after shaving. A breeze rolled in and knocked over one of Rachel's cosmetic trays, plastic, overstuffed with tiny glass bottles and brushes he didn't know the names of. Nothing broke. A few items spilled onto the floor. That was all. She found it later, after work, when her heels clicked too sharply across the tile. He was in the kitchen, drying dishes, when her voice cut through the quiet. Seriously? Can you not just think for once? He turned slowly. The window? Don't play dumb. That wind messed up everything. I have expensive stuff in there. You treat this place like it's your little cave, and I'm just supposed to clean up after you? He blinked, towel still in hand. It's just a window, Rachel. No, Dad. It's not just a window. It's everything. You being here, always in the way, always needing help or reminding or space or silence. You've been dragging me down since I was a kid. The air snapped. Louis didn't move, but he felt it, deep, sharp, like ice behind the ribs. Rachel wasn't done. I could have done more. Been more. But I had to take care of you. Your bills. Your moods. Your damn old man routines. I'd have a real life by now if I wasn't always stepping around you. He placed the dish towel on the counter with slow, deliberate care. She waited for him to argue. He didn't. She scoffed. You never say anything. Just sulk and sigh and act like the martyr. I didn't know I was an anchor, he said quietly. Rachel rolled her eyes and walked out of the room. He heard her door slam a minute later. Louis stood there a while, letting the silence swell around him. The sound of the refrigerator motor was the only thing left. He didn't sleep that night. Not because he was angry. That had faded. What remained was something colder, cleaner. Clarity. By morning, the house felt unfamiliar again, but not because of her. Because he had finally stepped outside the spell. He called Mark, the realtor, just after 8. Let's do it, Louis said. List it. Today? Mark asked, surprised. Today, he said. Photos, paperwork, whatever it takes. I'm ready. He walked to the window, the one that still sat cracked open from yesterday. The wind was softer now, and sunlight slid across the floor in wide stripes. The same kitchen. The same walls. But this time, he didn't feel stuck. He felt free. The offer came in less than 2 days later. All cash. No contingencies. A quiet couple from out of state who wanted to retire near their grandkids. They loved the yard, the natural light, the solid bones. Said it reminded them of when houses were built to last. Louis read the email twice before calling Mark back. His voice didn't shake. He just said, Let's move forward. Mark chuckled, a little impressed. You've got a dream file here, Louise. These buyers are serious. 2-week close, if you're good with it. Louis nodded to no one. That's fine. The next morning, he signed the preliminary agreement at the kitchen table while Rachel was in the shower. Steam curled around the bathroom door. The house was quiet except for the scratching of pen on paper and the low hum of the refrigerator. It felt surreal, in a way. Like moving underwater. He was changing the trajectory of both their lives with each signature, but it didn't feel dramatic. It felt overdue. He folded the paperwork neatly and slipped it into the manila envelope. 2 weeks. 14 days. And this chapter would close just like the sale, quietly, without a scene. Rachel didn't suspect anything. She floated through the week with the same distracted energy, half in her phone, half somewhere else. She left dishes in the sink, started laundry without finishing it, and borrowed his car without asking. Louis let her. She commented once on how much cleaner the house looked, with boxes missing from the hallway and old tools no longer cluttering the laundry shelf. About time we started getting rid of some of this junk, she said. He smiled barely. Yeah, about time. He'd packed most of the essentials already. Documents, clothes, photos, a few keepsakes. The rest he'd leave behind. Let the new couple decide what mattered. Maybe they'd find Maria's humming comforting in the hallway too, even if it only lived in the walls now. Each night, he checked the countdown in his head. 12 days. 11. 10. Still, he said nothing. Not to Rachel. Not to anyone else. He wanted the peace to come unannounced, the way storms sometimes lift in the early morning, leaving the world fresh, rearranged, not asking permission. On the 12th evening, Rachel ordered takeout and asked, offhandedly, "Can you Venmo me for your half?" Louise smiled softly. "Sure." He looked at her across the table. A grown woman who still hadn't noticed the weight of what she stood on was about to shift. He wasn't angry. Just done. He waited until she'd gone to bed, late, after another call that ended in laughter and wine. Her door closed with a soft click, and the house settled into that familiar nighttime stillness. No music, no questions, just the hum of old walls breathing around him. Louise walked slowly, barefoot on the cool floor, as if every board might speak. The living room was first. The couch sagged in the middle, same as always. He ran his hand along the back of it, remembering movie nights with popcorn in a metal bowl and Rachel curled beside him, small enough then to fit under one arm. She used to fall asleep before the credits. He'd carry her to bed, always careful not to wake her. The hallway came next. He paused at the closet, where her growth chart had once been taped to the inside of the door. Little pencil marks he and Maria had added every 6 months, marveling each time. He could still see the faint impressions, even after they were painted over. In her old bedroom, the one she'd turned into a sleek guest suite now, he stood by the window where the curtains used to be pink with cartoon stars. He remembered the tantrums, the slammed doors, the nights she cried over lost friends, broken hearts, the weight of being too much and not enough all at once. He'd sat on the edge of this bed countless times, rubbing her back, telling her that she was loved, even when the world didn't feel like it. Now the room was spotless, soulless, as if childhood had never lived there at all. He made his way to the kitchen last. The scent of lemon cleaner lingered. Rachel had wiped down the counters before bed, a rare habit. He stood at the sink, staring out the window. The porch light flickered, just like it had for years. He used to promise himself he'd fix it, but never did. It became part of the place, like the squeaky drawer that always stuck or the creak in the hallway near the laundry room. His hand rested on the counter, steady. He wasn't sad. Not in the way he once feared he'd be. He didn't hate her. He hated the silence that had taken root between them, the casualness with which she had rewritten the past. But hate? No. He could still remember the little girl who clung to his hand at the grocery store, the teenager who left notes in his lunchbox during finals week, the young woman who once whispered, "Thanks for everything, Dad," when she thought he was asleep. She wasn't that girl anymore. And he wasn't just her father anymore. He was a man. And for the first time in a long while, he was choosing himself. Tomorrow, the house would belong to someone else. Tonight, it was still his. And he was saying goodbye. The morning of closing was quiet. Rachel was still asleep, the door to her room half shut like always, never wide open, never fully closed. The hallway light spilled softly over the carpet, and Luis moved like a man who'd already left in his mind. His suitcase was by the door. Just one. He didn't need more. Everything else he wanted was already waiting for him, boxed and delivered to the condo by the coast. The rest would stay: plates, lamps, curtains, the life they'd shared, frozen in place like furniture in a room no longer visited. He stood in the kitchen for a long moment before reaching for the small white envelope. Inside was the letter he had written the night before, folded neatly. No flourish. Just the truth. He taped it gently to the fridge, at her eye level, beside the shopping list she'd half-written in blue marker. There was something strange about seeing both notes there side by side, hers mundane and open-ended, his final and weighted. The letter read, "Rachel, you once said I ruined your life. I heard you. I've carried those words with me, heavier than any bill I ever paid, heavier than any sacrifice I ever made to keep this roof over us. I hope selling this house gives you the clean start you wanted. Far from me. This place was never meant to be a burden to you. It was meant to be a home, a foundation. You treated it like a cage. Maybe you needed to. Maybe I became part of what held you back. But I also hope that one day, when you're ready, You remember what it took to keep this house standing. Not money. Not luck. Love. Quiet, stubborn love. The kind that doesn't ask for thanks, but still notices when none comes. Take care of yourself. Live well. You don't owe me anything. And I'm done asking for anything in return. Dad. He stood there after placing it, hand still on the tape, as if holding it a moment longer might make it say more. But it said enough. He left his key on the counter. No text. No announcement. Just turned the knob slowly and stepped outside into the morning. The sky was pale and clean. The kind of morning that doesn't ask questions. He got into the car, engine already humming, and pulled away from the curb without looking back. She would find the letter. Maybe today. Maybe after the buyers arrived. But when she read it, she would know. He was gone. And this time, he wasn't waiting for her to follow. The key jammed. Rachel twisted harder, jiggled the handle, but the door wouldn't budge. She stepped back, staring at the lock like it had betrayed her. The house sat still behind it, same porch light, same welcome mat. Nothing looked different, but everything suddenly felt wrong. She tried again. Nothing. A moment later, the door opened from the inside. A woman in her 60s stood there, gentle-faced, holding a small dog in one arm and a cup of tea in the other. Behind her, a man, probably her husband, was arranging a potted plant on the windowsill. "Oh," the woman said, smiling. "You must be Rachel." Rachel blinked. "Excuse me? I'm Evelyn. This is Greg. We just moved in. Closed this morning." Her tone was warm, almost apologetic, like she was breaking bad news about the weather. Rachel's mouth went dry. "Moved in?" Greg appeared behind Evelyn. "Your dad said you'd be stopping by." "My dad?" Rachel repeated, her voice tightening. "What do you mean, closed?" Evelyn stepped aside just enough for Rachel to see inside. Furniture different, rugs gone, the house rearranged. Her chest tightened as her eyes darted past the entryway. Her coat was gone from the hook. Her books. The tray in the bathroom. All of it. The house wasn't hers anymore. She pushed past them without asking, breath caught in her throat. "Where is he?" "He left you something," Evelyn said gently. "It's on the fridge." Rachel moved on instinct. The kitchen still smelled faintly of the lemon cleaner he always used. But her water bottle, her charger, her grocery list, all of it was gone. In their place, a white envelope. Her name written in his handwriting. The tape was already curling slightly at the edges. She stared at it for a long moment before tearing it down. Her hand shook as she opened it. Her eyes skimmed the words. Each line cut deeper than the last. Not from anger. From restraint. He was calm. Resolved. Gone. "You said I ruined your life." She read it again, slower this time. A part of her wanted to call him immediately, to yell, to demand answers, apologies, undoings. But her phone wasn't here. Nothing was. She turned around, letter still in hand, and found Evelyn watching her with a kindness that made it worse. "I'm sorry," Evelyn said softly. "He seemed like a very decent man." Rachel didn't respond. She walked out of the house, her old house, and down the porch steps like a stranger. Not angry. Not yet. Just hollow. Like someone had moved the ground while she was sleeping. For the first time in a long time, she didn't know where to go. Rachel stood in the driveway, letter crumpled in her fist, her voice echoing against the quiet morning like a wounded animal. "He left me? He left me? What kind of father just disappears like that?" She spun in a half circle, eyes wild, scanning for someone to witness the betrayal. "This was my home, too. He didn't even tell me. He just left." Her words cracked at the edges. A curtain twitched across the street. Mrs. Heller, 2 doors down, watched from behind her rose bushes. Mr. Tran from next door stood near his recycling bin, pausing mid-sort. Even the mailman, slow on his route, lingered longer than necessary at the corner. Rachel didn't care. Or maybe she did. "He abandoned me," she screamed. "He's a coward." Greg, the new owner, stood respectfully near the door, saying nothing. Evelyn had already gone inside. The small dog barked once, then went quiet. Rachel dropped to her knees on the driveway. The concrete scraped her skin, But she didn't feel it. She was too busy drowning in confusion, in fury, in the slow, creeping understanding that something had ended, and she hadn't seen it coming. She hadn't thought it would actually happen. Because people like her father didn't walk away. They waited. They stayed. They absorbed. But he hadn't. From across the street, Mrs. Heller finally called out, not cruel, just matter of fact. He gave you everything, Rachel. We all saw it. Don't act surprised, he finally gave himself something too. Rachel looked up, stunned. Excuse me? You treated him like he didn't exist, the woman said, arms folded. Like he was just the walls and the plumbing. He used to wave to me every morning. Haven't seen him smile in months. Rachel's breath caught in her throat. Mr. Trent added quietly, he used to mow my front strip without asking, even when his knees looked like they were giving out. Greg cleared his throat. He left the place spotless. Said it was important to him. Rachel clutched the letter, now wrinkled and damp in her palm. None of them were yelling. No one was shaming her. That might have been easier. This was worse. This quiet confirmation that maybe, just maybe, she had been the one too absorbed to notice the man who had built her life was slowly choosing to stop holding it together. She stood, brushed off her jeans with trembling hands, and walked back to her car. The house was no longer hers. The story was no longer hers to narrate. And the man she thought would never leave had finally left. The mug warmed his hands, ceramic smooth and steady. Steam drifted up and curled in the salt air as Luis leaned back in the chair, his gaze fixed on the slow roll of waves meeting the sand below. The tide came in like breath, gentle, deliberate, unbothered. His balcony wasn't grand. A narrow strip of wood just wide enough for a small table and 2 chairs. But it faced the ocean, and that was enough. Seagulls traced lazy arcs across the sky. Someone walked a dog far down the beach, the leash slack between them. No horns. No clocks. No sharp edges. Just water. Wind. Quiet. The condo was furnished, modest but clean. He hadn't brought much with him, just what mattered. A framed photo of Maria in the hallway. A few books. The letter she wrote him, folded inside the nightstand drawer. Her handwriting had faded a little, but the words hadn't. He read them sometimes. Not because he needed reassurance, but because they reminded him who he still was. His phone sat face down beside him. He hadn't checked it today. Not out of anger. He just didn't need to. The guilt that used to follow him like a shadow had gone silent. He'd carried it for years, dragging it through long work shifts, sleepless nights, and holidays spent pretending everything was fine. He had confused love with sacrifice. Believed that fatherhood meant being invisible as long as the lights stayed on and the fridge stayed full. But invisibility corrodes. It makes a man forget that his life belongs to him, too. He hadn't ruined Rachel's life. He saw that now, clearer than ever. She had said those words in a moment of entitlement, not truth. And he had believed them, once. Let them take root. But not anymore. What he'd finally done, was rescue himself. He'd pulled his own name from the wreckage, and walked away before bitterness buried him in his own living room. A breeze shifted across the balcony, lifting the corners of a magazine he wasn't reading. Louis smiled to himself and sipped his tea. The salt in the air reminded him of summer trips Maria used to dream about but never got to take. Maybe this, now, was for her too. A soft landing. A second act. He wasn't waiting on Rachel to call. And if she did, he'd answer. But not from obligation. Only if her voice came with honesty. And maybe, one day, gratitude. Until then, he had the sea. The silence. His name on a lease he signed with his own hand. And for the first time in years, he didn't feel tired. Or used. Or waiting. He just felt like a man. Finally at peace.